There are many mysteries in history, but some of the most eerie ones originate from the World War I battlefields. The effects of that terrible struggle are still being felt more than a century later. Undiscovered artifacts, untold tales, and unsettling artifacts that serve as a reminder of a conflict that permanently altered the course of history. Every discovery, from sunken ships to hidden passageways and surprising treasures, tells a terrifying and engrossing tale. Come discuss the most bizarre World War I finds that stunned the entire globe. 20. U-boat from Germany. One of the most peculiar World War I findings in Britain was the German U-boat UB-122, which was found lying on the mudflats of the River Medway at Hoe, Kent. When the steel-hulled submarine was spotted at low tide in 1921 far from the open ocean, it attracted notice for the first time. The wreck was identified as belonging to UB-122 by local sources and subsequent marine archaeologist examinations. After the war, one of about 100 German U-boats turned themselves into Britain. The discovery was immediately linked by researchers to naval actions following the conflict. In order to boost Britain's post-war industry, records indicate that the diesel engines from the submarine were taken out and repurposed in a cement mill at Howling. The hull was still there. According to experts, a tow line most likely broke while UB-122 was being dragged up the Medway estuary to be disassembled for scrap. The weather. The submarine was forced into the isolated mudflats by strong winds and currents, and it has stayed there ever since. Since UB-122 is the only completely complete German U-boat still visible in British tidal waters, its finding is noteworthy. 19. A World War I shelter that had been sealed for nearly a century has been discovered in the Italian Alps, thanks to a melting glacier on Mount Scoruso, hidden away. Approximately 20 Austrian forces used the cave, which was more than 10,000 feet above sea level, as a base during the battle. The spot was preserved precisely as they left it when the glacier closed the entrance after they left on November 3, 1918. In 2017, when the ice had finally melted enough, scientists ventured into the cave and discovered something remarkable. They discovered food containers, utensils, lights, and coats made of animal hides within.
Approximately 20 Austrian forces used the cave, which was more than 10,000 feet above sea level, as a base during the battle. The spot was preserved precisely as they left it when the glacier closed the entrance after they left on November 3, 1918. In 2017, when the ice had finally melted enough, scientists ventured into the cave and discovered something remarkable. They discovered food containers, utensils, lights, and coats made of animal hides within, postcards, newspapers, and straw mattresses, a complete picture of what it was like for soldiers fighting in the harsh alpine environment during the White War. Avalanches killed more people than enemy bullets, and winter temperatures in the region may drop to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The relics offer important proof of how Austrian soldiers resisted Italian forces while enduring remoteness, bitter cold, and hazardous terrain. The location, which experts refer to as a time machine, captures the exact moment the final soldier closed the entrance and climbed down the mountain as the conflict came to an end. 18. Trench fortification at Hill 80. Did you know that in the Belgian village of Vichat, a secret German trench fortification from World War I was discovered? Volunteer archaeologists found this location, called Hill 80 in 2018, before it was demolished for a housing development. The Dig Hill 80 initiative, headed by Belgian archaeologist Simon Vertigem, used crowdfunding to gather more than 200,000 euros to investigate the location, which had been a crucial German stronghold with a view of the Ypres salient. The team discovered a whole system of trenches, bunkers, and even pieces of electric wiring that used to power signal lamps all around the battlefield during the excavation. Soldiers' desperate attempts to keep their feet dry in the soggy mud of Flanders were demonstrated by ledges and timber floors. It was a frightening and exciting revelation. More than 130 soldiers, mostly German, but some British and French, were discovered, some of them in collective graves. Numerous people still had their personal belongings, including ammunition, footwear, and even bullet-holed water bottles. The narrative of Hill 80 is one of vicious static combat. Soldiers moved swiftly into Belgium in the early stages of the conflict, but by the time they dug in, the conflict had descended into a deadly standoff. 17. Artifacts from battle. Unexpectedly, remnants of a lost World War I combat were found in Israel. While excavating near Rosh HaAin, which is near the ancient citadel of Antipaters, archaeologists and student volunteers discovered rifle cartridges, cannon shrapnel, and even a piece of a British military insignia. Instead of finding biblical artifacts, the team discovered evidence from the Battle of Megiddo in 1918, where the Ottoman and British armies engaged in a bloody struggle for sovereignty of Palestine. The artifacts recounted the intense confrontation. The fact that Ottoman rifle cartridges were made in Germany demonstrated that Turkish troops received supplies from their European allies. Shrapnel balls and pieces of British shells nearby suggested that 18-pounder field guns were used to drive the defenders out. The outcome of the conflict was vividly depicted by the finding of a British cap badge inside an Ottoman stronghold. As 2 battalions of the Norfolk Regiment stormed the fields and ridges, historians were able to follow their movements. The artifacts also demonstrated how the Ottomans resisted British troops' advances with Mauser rifles, holding their positions until the very end. 16. Soldier's bedroom. You may think that time had frozen in 1918 if you entered a peaceful home in the central French village of Belabre. Second Lieutenant Hubert Rochero, a young French soldier who departed home during World War I and never came back, has a maintained bedroom on the top floor. After he passed away at the age of 21 from injuries sustained in Flanders, his parents converted the space into a private memorial. The room hasn't changed since the day he left. A wooden stand still holds a uniform that has been ravaged by moths. On the desk, dust covers a carton of Gold Flake cigarettes, tobacco tins, and pipes. His military cap and decorations, including the Legion of Honor and the Croix de Guerre, are kept on his lace-covered bed. When his remains was eventually returned to the local cemetery, soil from the battlefield where he fell was brought back in a little bottle marked Earth of Flanders. The bereaved parents sold the house in 1935, but they insisted that the bedroom be left unaltered for 500 years. 15. Chemical weapons. A piece of World War I history was the last thing anyone expected to find in a quiet park in Washington, D.C. An employee of the National Park Service discovered 2 metal canisters in 2022 while working in Fort Totten Park, a location most famous for its Civil War past. Upon arrival, experts discovered that the items were not innocuous trash, but rather ammunition from the chemical warfare era, dating back a century. After promptly securing the area, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers moved the canisters to Marine Corps Base Quantico for examination. One was described as Livens-like, which is similar to the basic mortars used to discharge drums containing poisonous chemicals during World War I. A 75 millimeter ordnance with a hex plug burster, adapter the kind that turns ordinary shells into chemical weapons, was the second. Such secrets had previously been exposed by Fort Totten. In 2020, a shell that was comparable to the one discovered in the decades-long cleanup of Spring Valley, where the U.S. chemical agents were once tested by the Army close to American University. 14. Brown Down Trenches. After decades of concealment, a remarkable piece of World War I history surfaced from the peaceful heathland of Brown Down in Gosport, Hampshire, 2011. While going through old aerial photos from 1951, the council employee uncovered an amazing find. The pictures showed the general layout of vast trench networks that had been long hidden behind bracken and gorse. Upon returning to the location, the practice battlefield's shallow incisions were once more evident, providing a clear connection to the British forces' training grounds from over a century earlier. The site has a 660-foot front line and is the size of 17 football fields, dugouts, supply trenches, and even a section of unclaimed territory. Before being sent to France and Belgium, recruits were given a realistic experience in these trenches, which were designed to resemble the Western Front. According to historical accounts, the Hampshire Regiment and the Royal Marines Light Infantry received training here, learning how to fortify, dig, and endure in the hazardous and muddy environment of trench warfare. By 2024, in order to guarantee their preservation for upcoming generations, the British government designated the Brown Down Trench as a scheduled monument. 13. The wreck of the German submarine UC-61. Imagine strolling down a peaceful northern French beach when all of a sudden the rusting form of a German WW1 submarine emerges from the sand. In Huissons, close to Calais, that is precisely what took place, where, at low tide in late 2018, the UC-61 wreck started to reappear. One of the first people to notice the striking location was tour guide Vincent Schmidt, who frequently travels to the region. He initially believed it to be a piece of metal debris, but then he saw the U-boat's curved contour. The history of the UC-61 was spectacular. It departed Zeebrugge, Belgium, in July 1917 to plant naval mines along the French coast, close to Le Havre and Boulogne-sur-Mer. When the submarine became stuck in shallow water off Wissant, the operation was a failure. The 25 crew members had no way out, so they set off the ship's mines and then turned themselves in to the local authorities. The U-boat was buried in sand for over a century after the explosion destroyed it. It seldom and briefly returns to the surface because the sand that typically conceals it is moved by storms and tides. 12. World War I armaments. Following the conclusion of World, beneath the soil of Belgium and northern France's fields lies a terrible secret. More than a century after the guns went silent, unexploded grenades, artillery rounds, and even chemical weapons still turn up along the old Western Front. When plowing their fields, farmers frequently make the first discovery, mistaking the rusted circles for pebbles or, in one instance, potatoes. These discoveries prompt the response of specialized French demining teams. In order to guarantee their preservation for upcoming generations, the British government designated the Brown Down Trench as a scheduled monument. 13. The wreck of the German submarine UC-61. Imagine strolling down a peaceful northern French beach when all of a sudden the rusting form of a German WW1 submarine emerges from the sand. In Huissons, close to Calais, that is precisely what took place, where, at low tide in late 2018, the UC-61 wreck started to reappear. One of the first people to notice the striking location was tour guide Vincent Schmidt, who frequently travels to the region. He initially believed it to be a piece of metal debris, but then he saw the U-boat's curved contour. The history of the UC-61 was spectacular. It departed Zeebrugge, Belgium, in July 1917 to plant naval mines along the French coast, close to Le Havre and Boulogne-sur-Mer. When the submarine became stuck in shallow water off Wissant, the operation was a failure. The 25 crew members had no way out, so they set off the ship's mines and then turned themselves in to the local authorities. The U-boat was buried in sand for over a century after the explosion destroyed it. It seldom and briefly returns to the surface because the sand that typically conceals it is moved by storms and tides. 12. World War I armaments. Following the conclusion of World, beneath the soil of Belgium and northern France's fields lies a terrible secret. More than a century after the guns went silent, unexploded grenades, artillery rounds, and even chemical weapons still turn up along the old Western Front. When plowing their fields, farmers frequently make the first discovery, mistaking the rusted circles for pebbles or, in one instance, potatoes. These discoveries prompt the response of specialized French demining teams. A selection of paper money and coins from the early 1900s and 1800s. A tense situation was transformed into one of wonder by the revelation. What had previously been a weapon of war had been turned into a clever hiding spot for someone's valuable savings. A secret storage container. The family was permitted to keep the historic money after the bomb squad successfully removed the shell. In several places of Scotland, similar stories have been reported, where vintage World War I shells were occasionally emptied and used as ornaments, or even holders for mementos. Long after the cannons stopped firing, several of these shells were brought home by soldiers as mementos from the battlefield. The Secret Lab. One of the most bizarre globe War I discoveries that stunned the entire globe is depicted in a picture that has been making the rounds online. It depicts a dimly lit tunnel with odd shelves, stocked with skulls and ancient wooden beams. A few people in the shadows, dressed like scientists from the early 20th century, are seen inspecting artifacts as though they were in a covert laboratory. The Hill 80 bunker system in Belgium, where German forces erected deep trench fortresses, is thought by many historians to be related to this secret location. This image becomes much more enigmatic when one considers that some of the tunnels were subsequently utilized for storage or research. The presence of scientists and the uncanny combination of human remains has sparked countless internet discussions. The picture depicts the gloomy, covert aspect of World War I that still fascinates and unnerves spectators today. Piece of artillery. Instead of a piece of World War I history, construction workers in Vancouver expected mud and old concrete when they started excavating beneath the Pacific National Exhibition Amphitheater. One Thursday in 2025, workmen discovered what they initially believed to be a huge cannon. City officials quickly questioned whether the rusting antique would still be unsafe when a crane was brought in to lift it. Local archaeologists and specialists from the Seaforth Highlanders of Canada Museum. It was soon established that the item was a piece of German field artillery from circa 1914. The weapon was probably taken by Canadian forces during the conflict and sent home as a prize. Similar firearms were on exhibit in Canadian cities following World War I, but many of them rusted and were eventually taken down. During World War II, some were reportedly buried, while others were chopped up for scrap. This specific weapon, which weighs about 1.5 tons, had been concealed under the PNE grounds for almost a century. Given that Hastings Park was formerly used as a training and parade location for Canadian troops en route to Europe, its existence provides a clear link to Vancouver's military history. 7. The Mark I tank's lost blueprint. The only known blueprint for the British Mark I tank, one of the most remarkable artifacts from World War I, was discovered again in 2022. This important record, found in a private collection, the 44 by 28-inch document soon gained notoriety as the birth certificate of the tank. It began in May 1916, a few months before these groundbreaking land ships made their debut on the battlefield during the Somme Offensive's Battle of Flers-Courcelette. The first tracked armored fighting vehicle in history was the Mark I tank, which was created by William Ashby Tritton and Lieutenant Walter Gordon Wilson. It broke the impasse of trench warfare by overcoming barbed wire, shell holes, and trenches thanks to its characteristic rhomboid shape. For over $20,000, the Tank Museum in Bovington, Dorset, bought the blueprint and the original patent specification at auction for the country. According to museum director David Willey, viewing the text is like viewing an X-ray of a mechanical leviathan. It provides insight into the invention that revolutionized modern warfare. 6. A lost submarine from World War I. The USS F-1, a World War I submarine, has finally been found off the coast of San Diego, more than a century after it disappeared. When dense fog rolled in 1917, the sub was practicing with two sister ships. 19 sailors lost their lives in the collision that sent the F-1 plummeting 300 feet to the ocean below, and the disaster was lost to history. The discovery was made in early 2025 when a research team headed by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution used sophisticated sonar to explore the Pacific seabed and combed through Navy documents. The team was able to identify the submarine's hull's characteristic lines in a single day. They created a three-dimensional model of the ship lying on its starboard side, its blackened metal shell amazingly preserved. Using high-resolution photos taken by Alvin, a deep-sea autonomous vehicle, historians and divers were astounded by how complete the ship looked, with the bow pointed northwest, as though it had been frozen in time and the propellers still visible. Additionally, the trip provided hands-on experience in underwater archaeology, teaching the next generation of submersible pilots. The badge for female relatives. Now let's discuss a modest but potent reminder of World War I that was recently found in an attic in Tasmania. The badge for female relatives. A family discovered this unusual insignia while going through a box of mementos hidden next to faded letters and pictures. It appeared to be a straightforward brooch at first, but the engraved inscriptions gave away its profound significance. Awarded to Australian women by the Department of Defense in recognition of their service. These badges were awarded to the closest female relatives during World War I, typically the wives or mothers of Australians serving abroad. For family members of servicemen of the Royal Australian Navy who served outside of Australian seas, a unique version was created. A modest insignia could be transformed into a silent tale of sacrifice by adding little bars to the badge to show whether multiple family members were serving. The insignia that was discovered in Tasmania had a bar connected, indicating that the wearer had multiple loved ones at the front. Their issue was governed by 1917 and 1918 military instructions, establishing them as recognized official symbols. Fourth, a graphic novel about World War I. Both comic book fans and historians have been astounded by the unearthing of a lost World War I graphic novel in Australia. The piece was drawn by C and was titled Voyage and Adventures of a Good Little German in Kangaroo Land. Between 1916 until 1919, Friedrich, a German cartoonist, was imprisoned in a New South Wales internment camp. Sally Gore's Fox, an alumna, recently gave his 5 miniature illustrated volumes to the University of Adelaide Library's special collections after they had been hidden in a family collection for more than a century. The material was initially thoroughly examined by researchers Simon Walsh and Aaron Humphrey. They found that Friedrich drew his own voyage from his arrival in Australia to his life in the Holsworthy detention camp, guarded by barbed wire. The cartoons combine observation, comedy, and irritation to create a sequential story that predates the widely acknowledged beginnings of autobiographical graphic books by decades. The discovery could change the genre's history, which is typically linked to 1970s underground comics. In addition to its literary value, the collection provides a unique glimpse into the psychological landscape of World War I prisoners. 3. An opulent cruise ship. When the expedition cruise ship Seabourn Pursuit discovered the Titania, a German warship from World War I, while conducting a submarine dive in Chile's isolated Juan Fernandez archipelago, luxury and history came together. Under the direction of pilot Mauricio Fernandez, visitors on board the ship went down in a miniature submarine on October 14th, roughly 310 feet below the waters. They discovered the Titania, which had not been seen since it sank in 1914, lying on the ocean's surface. Gino Perez, a local fisherman who had grown up hearing stories about the sunken ship, helped make the finding feasible. Although fishermen had periodically discovered little pieces of metal in their lobster traps, the site of the wreck had never been verified. Fernandez and his crew filled the submarine as soon as they saw the ship. It dawned on the passengers that they were seeing a quiet, surviving tale from a century ago. In the early months of World War I, the Titania was scuttled. On November 19, 1914, in order to keep it out of the hands of the enemy. 2. A blood-stained wristband used by stretcher-bearers during World War I. The blood-stained wristband of Private Frank Pye, a stretcher-bearer with the 1st East Lancashire Field Ambulance, is one of the most eerie artifacts from World War I. The cotton wristband and Hanson's diaries, which were still smudged with faded pencil lines from a century ago, were discovered by his auctioneers. Following the conclusion of World War I, it's more than just a piece of fabric. It serves as a vivid memory of the atrocity endured by those who put their lives at danger to save the injured. Frank's diaries describe evenings that were filled with the stifling fog of mustard gas, the roar of hunger barrages, and the never-ending flow of wounded soldiers. Moments that few could stand to see were captured in graphic detail by him. While bandaging the injured, comrades were killed. Shells tore apart German soldiers, and the unsettling image of little balloons delivering signals across the battlefield. He even writes of surviving a gas event in which he was ill for days after his mask fell into a hole and was ripped off. Photos, trench magazines, and a moving poem honoring his brother-in-law, who was killed in 1917, are all included in the collection. The Tunnel of Death is the first. The spooky effect of the Winterberg Tunnel near Rheims, France, is rarely matched by World War I tunnel discoveries. Following a horrific incident in 1917, the corpses of more than 270 German soldiers were locked in this underground corridor for more than a century. During the spring onslaught, the tunnel provided men with shelter and supplies for frontline trenches as part of the German positions along the Chemin de Dame. French artillery shells struck the entrance and exit, starting the terrible tragedy, keeping the 111th Reserve Regiment's troops trapped inside. Deadly vapors were released when ammunition kept in the tunnel exploded, preventing anyone from escaping. Later testimonies from survivors described suffocation, thirst, and frantic cries for help. Days later, only 3 men were saved. The others become quiet observers of the brutality of the conflict. Before identifying the location, local historian Alan Malinowski studied maps and documents for decades. With a meticulous excavation in 2020, his son Pierre verified the discovery and discovered machine guns, gas mask canisters, and human bones that were impeccably preserved, resembling a frozen moment in time. What would you do first if you found a wartime tunnel that was blocked off? Document it, investigate it, or report it. For more, subscribe to our channel and leave a comment.